Bertram woke up one morning to find something that completely shattered her. Her husband of 8 years had vanished without a trace. She was left abandoned and emotionally devastated. With no clue about where her husband had gone, her only option was to wait. The story that I'm going to tell you is true but extremely bizarre. Bertram was about to become the central character of one of the greatest mysteries of the century. For centuries to come, numerous books, novels, historical accounts, documentaries, and even a movie will be based on this very story. The year was 1548. Martin Guerre, the husband of Bertrand de Rolles, had been accused of stealing a small quantity of grain from his father. In the Basque tradition of the 16th century, it was seen as a heinous crime. To avoid punishment, he simply left the village, leaving his wife and newborn child behind. The village he left was named Ardigate, located in the southwest of France. In the 16th century, especially in Europe, a woman really needed her husband to survive in society. Bertrand deeply needed her husband back, a partner for companionship, affection, provision, and shared responsibility. She desperately waited for Martin's return. For 8 long years, she waited. During Martin's absence, his father passed away, and since Martin was gone, his uncle Pierre Guerre took charge of the property and the family's small tileworks business. Then, in the summer of 1556, the day came when Martin finally returned. The whole village welcomed him. His uncle immediately hugged him and greeted him back. He then met his 4 sisters. All 4 sisters, like others, shed tears and embraced him. At last he met his wife, Bertrand. To Bertrand, it felt like her life was given back to her. The moment she had dreamt and imagined constantly for almost a decade had come true. She could not be happier. She forgave him and accepted him as he had never left. They start living a normal couple's life, eating, drinking, and sharing a bed together. In the next 4 years, the couple had 2 more kids. Martin appeared more respectful and loving towards Bertrand and even more honorable towards the villagers. It felt like he had become a more noble person. In all historic accounts, it has been noted that these years were Bertrand's happiest, most beautiful years. But still, something felt strange. The villagers had noticed that before Martin's escape, he was unable to grow facial hair, but now he had a beard. However, this could be due to his young age, as he was just 22 when he left the village. The villagers also recalled his height and complexion, remembering him as slightly taller and darker skinned. However, cameras would not be invented for another 2 centuries, and with no formal records or biodata kept, there was no way villagers could verify their own memories. But 2 things really stood out, which made no sense. Number 1, he couldn't speak the Basque language, in which he was fluent before his departure. And number 2, he used to be skilled in acrobatics and sword fighting, but after his return, he was, weirdly enough, not athletic at all. And then an incident happened that really ingrained the idea that the man could actually be an imposter. A soldier passing through the village of Ardigat saw Martin. Upon seeing him, he shouted, "The man is not Martin, but Arnaud Dutil, a fraudster and an imposter." He also claimed that he had served with the real Martin Guerre, adding that Martin had lost a leg during a battle, which led him to wear a wooden leg. The speculations continued to grow among the villagers, but whenever someone became suspicious, he would silence them by recalling a memory with an exact date, exact time, exact location, and even the exact words they used during their conversation. Only Martin could know of such details. To calm the villagers' suspicions, Martin would recall memories from as far back as 20 years with intricate details. Although Martin's father was a peasant, he had worked hard enough to buy small land and start his own little tileworks business, which I mentioned earlier. Before his father died, despite the accusations against his son and his long absence from the village, he had still made Martin the legal heir of the land and the business. But since Martin was not present, his uncle Pierre Guerre took charge of both the land and the business, which I also mentioned earlier. But now it was time for Martin to take the business and land back. He demanded his inheritance back. However, Uncle Pierre in particular had grown quite suspicious of Martin's true identity. A few years back, Martin had begun leasing and selling the family's ancestral land, which violated the family's customs. It left Uncle Pierre utterly confused. He couldn't make sense. Why would Martin violate such important customs? Still, he kept his patience, but continued to refuse to hand over the business accounts. The continuous refusal made Martin frustrated, and he filed a civil lawsuit against his own uncle, and Pierre's patience snapped. He filed a counter case against Martin. He pressed that the man is not the real Martin. Instead, he was an imposter who had stolen the identity of his dead nephew. This was a risky lawsuit. If Pierre succeeded in convincing the judges, Martin would be hanged. If he failed, Pierre would be charged with false accusation and would face severe punishment. With no fingerprints, photographs, or even handwriting to compare, as Martin was illiterate, the court had to rely entirely on the chaotic, contradictory memories of an entire village. It was less of a court case and more of a village community event. It drew unprecedented attention from the Ardagate and the surrounding villages. The trial began in the court of Rieux, located in a nearby town. The accused Martin Guerre was brought before the court, facing the judge and his accuser, Bertrand de Rolles. Wait, what? Bertrand de Rolles? Well, yes. Guerre had pressured Bertrande to file a case of identity theft against her own husband. The charges were fraud, theft of identity, and adultery. As the trial began, over 150 villagers came to give their testimony. Out of those 150, exactly 45 villagers declared that the man was an imposter, insisting that his real name was Arnaud Dutil, the very man the soldier had warned them about. While some other witnesses were confused by the differences in height and complexion between the Martin standing in the courtroom and the Martin they had known before, they could not confirm that he was Arnaud Dutil, as the other 45 villagers claimed. Nonetheless, they maintained that he was not the real Martin Guerre. But on the other hand, the remaining villagers claimed that he was not an imposter, but the real Martin they had always known. At this point, the whole case had become utterly confusing. However, the situation was about to grow even more complicated. On the other side of the courtroom, there stood 4 Martin sisters. All 4 sisters kept insisting that the man was indeed their brother, the real Martin Guerre. Not just the village, but the family was also divided into 2 groups, one that claimed the man was Martin, and the other that claimed that he was not Martin, but an imposter. Along with Uncle Pierre, his sons-in-law also believed that the man was indeed an imposter. Then, the time came when the whole courtroom went silent. It was the time Bertrand would testify. At first, she insisted that he was her husband, the real Martin, but eventually backtracked and told the judge that the man was not Martin, and she lied out of fear that she would be charged with adultery. Now, the village is divided, the family is divided, and his own wife is giving changing statements. But the change in Bertrand's statement would cause Martin to lose the case. So, Martin stood up and looked Bertrand in her eyes, and told the judge that if she swore to God that he was not her husband but an imposter, he would happily accept any punishment, even death, that the court would give. Bertrand remained silent. At the end of the long, confusing trial, the judge sided with the 45 witnesses who claimed that the man was Arnaud Dutil, a resident of a nearby village who was infamous for stealing, lying, committing fraud, and womanizing. The court awarded him a very severe punishment. He was sentenced to be beheaded and his body to be burned. However, Martin acted immediately. He appealed to a much higher court, the Parlement of Toulouse, located roughly 70 kilometers to the north of Ardagate. In the summer of the same year, 1560, the second trial began. It was much larger in scale and highly anticipated and gossiped about. There was only one topic of discussion in every village and town of the South French region, the Martin Guerre Case. In the previous court, there was only one judge. In this court, there were 11 rotating judges and 3 presidents. Among the judges, one was Jean de Coras. He had a legacy of his own, a lawyer, jurist, university professor, and a man who really knew how to write. He compiled each and every detail of this case in a very compelling narration. Anyways, Martin was brought into this courtroom. One thing to note, before the second trial even started, the jury was already skeptical of the earlier court's decision, which gave Martin a favorable starting point. The trial went on for several months. Countless witnesses, proofs, hearings, and heated debates later, Judge Jean de Coras leaned towards Martin. But as the case was just about to be finalized and the verdict in Martin's favor was about to be announced, something happened that shook the entire court. A man had appeared with a wooden leg just as that soldier had described. He claimed to be the real Martin Guerre. He actually was the real Martin Guerre. All four sisters burst into tears. They immediately recognized him as their true brother. The moment Bertrande saw the newcomer, she collapsed on the floor, sobbing and begging for forgiveness. It was her actual husband. The whole case turned upside down. The man who had been living with Bertrande was indeed a con artist, an impostor, a liar, an adulterer, and a thief. He was indeed Arnaud Dutil. Jean de Coras gave him a severe punishment, just as the previous court had given him. Beheaded, and then the body was to be burned in public. Arnaud, restrained in chains, was forced to walk in public and apologize for what he had done. At this point, he had completely broken the character he had carried for the last 4 years and was crying. He publicly asked for forgiveness and all the motives he had behind his actions. When asked how he decided to take Martin's identity, he said that 2 of Martin's closest friends had once mistaken him for Martin. That moment gave him the confidence to believe he could fool the entire village and even Martin's own family. Still, people were confused. If he were not Martin, how could he recall and remember all the private memories with such accuracy? Arnaud explained that he collected all the details from Martin's sisters, Bertrande, and the people themselves, but villagers, especially Pierre Guerre, were not convinced. They believed Arnaud used magic. On September 12, 1560, just 4 days after the final verdict of Jean de Coras, Arnaud was sentenced to death in front of Martin's house. A large crowd gathered to see Arnaud's last moments. For 4 years, an entire village believed a lie. But what's more disturbing was that even the wife believed him. Or did she? Nonetheless, the whole case has one important takeaway. One cannot hide lies forever. If you happen to disagree with me, ask this guy.
Be careful. And I'm
See you in the next one. Take care. Bye.